Why do we do sprouts? For the very simplest reason is to increase the nutrient value of that little seed. Whole grains are wonderful and they have great nutrition in them, and we should be using whole grains. But we change them from a grain into literally a vegetable. Several things happen when you sprout. Now the mineral content does not change, but we're taking some of the stored starch that's in there and converting it into some sugars. They usually become sweeter. But the big thing is it's the live enzymes that you can then have access to that help with digestion and many positive things within the body. Also, the vitamin content. Some of the sprouts become much, much higher in vitamin C, vitamin A, some of the vitamin Bs and those things. So when you sprout a seed, you increase its nutrient value tremendously over a grain in particular areas. Use whole grains, use sprouts together, and now you have much better foods. Also, being able to sprout, you can have fresh greens and fresh vegetables in the middle of winter, in the dark, without anything very, very special as far as equipment goes. They need warmth, they need water, and they need a place to grow. And it's very, very simple, something you can do. And in an emergency, having high-quality nutrition is extremely important. I would recommend, however, that you're sprouting and using sprouts now so that, number one, you know how, and secondly, you're used to using them. They do taste different. And you add them to foods and mix them in with foods and salads and drop them in a soup. After the soup is cooked, when you're ready to eat it, you drop your sprouts in then. We're not trying to cook them, because if you cook them, you destroy some of the enzymes and things. We want to be eating them raw. Raw is better. So that's why we sprout. Now, what to sprout? Well, pretty much anything can be sprouted. Some of them taste better than others. Your common grains you can sprout. Now, first off, the kind of seeds that will sprout is they have to be whole, they have to be undamaged, meaning that they still have the outer skin on them, and in particular the germ. If you take a look at wheat, the germ is that little kind of a flat thing on one end. If that's polished off, it won't grow. White rice will never sprout. It will just decay because the outer skin, the dermis on the outside has been removed and the germ has been removed. The germ is where the life comes from. If you look at a kernel of corn, when you pluck it off of a cob, it has that white little thing down at the base. That's the germ. So anything that is whole, not split, cracked, and has the germ on it, generally will sprout. Wheat. It's one of the best ways to use wheat is allowing it to germinate and sprout and then use it that way. Now, you can cook with sprouts, by the way. You could take sprouted wheat or germinated wheat, and then you could crush it up and grind it up and put it into bread and things like that. And it'll have a different nutrient value than just the whole grain. The whole grain goodness will be there, plus some other things. One of my very favorite sprouts are lentils. A lot of people don't like the taste of lentils when they cook them because they have, I don't know, they maybe have a little bit of stronger taste or it's an unusual taste. But when they're sprouted, they're extremely mild. They're almost like an alfalfa sprout to me. So I like lentils. They also sprout very quickly. Whole green peas. Now, a split pea will not sprout because the germ is usually damaged, and so most split peas will not sprout. But the whole pea would sprout. Garbanzo beans, the chickpeas, they sprout. You can get kamut and spelt and things like that, fenugreek, any of the beans. Now, a lot of your larger beans, legumes like pinto beans, white beans, or some of those, they will sprout. However, I find if you let them go very long, they get to be, at least for me, very strong tasting. So you might want to experiment with different sprouts and or different grains or legumes and see what it is you would like to eat. Because in particular, you want to eat them raw, you'd like to eat them by themselves, but you can add them to a salad. I love a lentil sprout roll-up, and that's just sprouted lentils in a tortilla rolled up and with some salad dressing on it, just a little bit of salad dressing, or just vinegar and oil that you drizzle down into them. And that's a delicious way to have a salad, is with lentils. And so I do a lot of lentil sprouting, and then you can mix other things with them. So try anything and see which ones you like the best, but I'd really encourage you to try lentils. Now, the very small seeds, such as alfalfa and broccoli seeds amaranth and some of these very small ones, they're a little more problematic to sprout than, say, a larger thing like wheat or kamut or spelt, rye, and then also lentils and chickpeas. The very tiny ones are a little harder to sprout because they pack together real tight. They don't get as much air circulated through them, and they'll have a little more of a tendency to spoil, to mold. So you have to watch them more carefully and use more rinsing and stirring of them than the larger things like wheat and lentils. Now, what kind of sprouter to use? Well, there's basically 4 types that you can use. The simplest one, and one you can make yourself, is using a mason jar, a canning jar. Then you also have the stacking trays, and most time they'll be square or rectangular, and the bottoms of them are all perforated with holes, and you'll sprout on top of the holes. Then one that I've had since the mid-1970s, it used to be my absolute favorite, and that is called the Biosnacky, Biosnacky. This is also stacking trays, and it doesn't have perforations in the bottom. It rather has grooves in the bottom, and I'll describe how it works here in just a moment, but the Biosnacky. And then the one that I use all the time now, which is my top favorite now, is called the EasySprout, which is really a strange-looking one because it's kind of like 2 tumblers, one inside of the other one slightly smaller. So those would be the kinds of sprouters that we'll talk about. I'll begin with the mason jar briefly. And the mason jar will work in an emergency because you can scrounge up the pieces. If you have a canning jar and you have the ring, and if you have a piece of net type of fabric or even pantyhose, then you can use it, because what you do is you need to close off the end of this so that water will run in through this screen opening, and then you can drain the water out, but yet it'll let some air in. So pantyhose does work. Now, pantyhose is not the best. You'd like to have something that has larger holes in it, or what you buy at the health food stores, many stores, you can get a screw-on lid. It's either just molded plastic that has a lot of holes in it. It's a kind of a coarse screen material, or my favorite one has a stainless steel grid in it, and you screw it on the end of the jar. The way you sprout with it is you put your sprouting seeds in it. And here, don't overdo it with seeds, not too many. They swell up a lot, they grow a lot. So in a 1-quart mason jar, you wouldn't want to put more than a cup. In fact, a half a cup would be at the maximum I would ever want to put in of whatever kind of seed you want. Screw the lid on it that has the screen opening, and fill it up with water. Let it soak for a prescribed time, 4 to 8 hours, depends on the seed. Overnight is what I'll typically do. Drain off the water, rinse them, and then you can have several of these jars lined up. Now, it's best if they're placed at a slope. You can make a little rack that'll actually hold them to where the lid is pointed down at a 20 or 30 degree angle. This allows some of the water to drain out. And then once or twice a day, you'll run a little bit of warm water in there, slosh it around, drain it out, drain most of the water out, shake the seeds back down inside. This will, in fact, work. It's worked very successfully, but you have to watch it a lot. The seeds coat the inside of the bottle. The seeds on the bottom are sitting in water, and there's a tendency for them to spoil if you don't rinse them and don't turn them so that the seeds some seeds are not just sitting in the water all the time. And, of course, you can have them in different stages of sprouting, those that are soaking, those that are just beginning, those that are already germinated, and then those that are growing to maturity and ready to use. And it works quite well. But spoilage rate is fairly high, particularly if you're not paying careful attention to them. Then you have the trays that stack, and there's several brands of them out there. This is probably the most common type of seed sprouter. You spread the seeds out in the tray. You soak them first like in a bottle, and then you would take and spread the seeds out on the tray. You could also soak the seeds by placing the sprouter with the seeds in it in a pan of water and let them soak, then drain them, then rinse them, and then throughout the day, 2-3 times a day, you'd run a little water over them to keep them both damp and rinsed. The tendency is, if you're not careful, is they can dry out in this method. And one of the biggest problems I have with the stacking trays is that when the seeds sprout, the root will come down through and it'll grow out the bottom, and underneath you'll look and you'll see all these little feet growing out the bottom. That is problematic because when you have to clean up, you've got all these legs, they break off in there, and you have to scrub them out. You'll use a lot of water scrubbing them as well. And it'll also use a lot of water rinsing, because you have to rinse it regularly so they don't get too dry. Then you have the Biosnacky. The Biosnacky does not have grooves. This is why I fell in love with it back in the 70s when I got it, because it doesn't have holes in the bottom so the root can't grow down through. It has these little grooves. It has ridges that stand up that hold the seeds up. You'll have a little bit of water that stays down on the bottom. The seeds held up off of it so they can get a drink. But when they grow on the surface. So cleanup, it takes a much, much less water to clean them up. You also use less water sprouting. So that's one of the reasons I like this one, because of the low water use. And if you'll consider that during an emergency, water, potable water, clean water can be very, very precious. So the bottle method and the perforated tray method have one strong score against them, and that is the fact that they use a lot of water for the sprouting and the cleanup process. So I prefer using something that uses less water. So Biosnacky was my favorite. I still have one, and I'll still use it on occasion because it works so extraordinarily well. Follow the instructions on how to use it, but its advantage is much less water during cleanup and much less water during sprouting. It does an excellent job. Then we come to the EasySprout. The EasySprout, when I saw it in the store, I almost didn't buy it because it's weird. It's these two tumblers, one tumbler slightly smaller than the other inside of each other, and the inner one has some slots in the bottom, and I read the box, and it says the best sprouter in the world and all the wonderful things about it, and it's like a lot of advertisements like, oh, sure. But it was so different, and I'm intrigued by things. I wanted to find out. Money was a little precious at the time, and spending the $15 I was having a hard time doing, but I finally just needed to know. So I bought it, and I used it. It's the best sprouter in the world. It's what I use. I use it all the time. And I would prefer to use it over any other method, especially over the bottle method, especially over the tray method. And it's better than the Biosnacky. For one thing, it's more compact and it's smaller. Each one of them is. It's much more portable. You can take it with you. I've taken them inside of coolers in my car when I'm traveling, so I can actually sprout when I'm traveling. It's a little harder to do that with the Biosnacky, but its water use is the lowest of all. During cleanup, it takes far less water to clean up, and during the sprouting process in particular, it uses far less water. That's extremely important. Sprouts also sprout faster in it than it will in the others because it keeps them warmer, and warmth is a part of that. Particularly if you're having difficulty keeping your house warm, it's going to be easier to keep this warm, and they generate a little bit of heat themselves. So in the next section, I'll talk about using the EasySprout.